Sahana Vatu Sahano Bunatu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy and vigor. May we study well together, and may we not unnecessarily quarrel with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. A question often arises repeatedly, and therefore it has to be emphasized if there's an answer to such a question time and time again. In the midst of all the activities that we have to do, all the concerns, and sometimes all the traumatic events that accompany our history called life, how can we practice in a spiritual way? How can we do spiritual practice, what is called sadhana? But I think there's a mistake. The mistake, of course, is to separate so-called secular life and spiritual life, thinking that spiritual life is all to do with sitting, praying, doing some sandhya or something of that nature, meditating, doing japa, all of these as separate activities at certain times during the day. And no doubt this is necessary. But what about the intermediate periods of time? There is a wonderful monastic tradition that was brought about by Saint Benedict in Western monasticism, and the whole of life was called Opus Dei. That is, work of God, divine work. But they weren't referring at all to working in the dairy, in the monastery, or tending the garden vegetable. They weren't talking about those kinds of activities. They were talking about assembling as a community 7 times a day. And during that period of time, bringing the mind in a sense of silence, in silent moments at specific times of the day. And doing this by systematic prayer, systematic singing, chanting, and those kinds of things. And the idea was that during a day, you can interject the day and divide it up, in this case, into 7 spaces. And there is no doubt that there are certain times of the day which are auspicious for that kind of activity. But it also says that when you do all the other activities, such as tending the dairy, the vegetables, all of these activities that happen in large monasteries, when you do these activities, you're continuing your prayerfulness. That's the idea. So that life becomes a nice balance of prayerfulness, meditation, work, study. But what about the householder? What about the person who has to work in a traditional sense of the word? The person who has to go to the office, or the person who is busy on the internet day in, day out, or the person who's doing manual work? What about those people? So there's a wonderful story that is given about the great devotee Narada, who claims to be the greatest devotee of Vishnu. But Vishnu, seeing his pride, said, because you see, there is such a thing as spiritual egoism also. He said, look, I do know one devotee at least who is much more devout than you, who's has much more love for me, thinks of me in a much more profound way. I don't think you can claim superiority as the greatest devotee ever. Who is this person? Let me give you a yoga insight, says Vishnu. With this yogic insight, you can study the life of this man. And suddenly was revealed a farmer, and the farmer got up extremely early in the morning, repeating God's name lovingly, lighting a lamp, sitting for a short period of time, and then preparing himself for work, going out in the fields, working even through the blazing sun and the heat of the day, 12 o'clock noon, and at the end of it, coming back, taking his bath, and before he takes his meal, one last prayer. And off he is to bed. Same thing is repeated day after day. And Narada thinks, I think, my Lord is infallible, of course, but on this occasion, maybe he made a mistake. How is it possible that this is a greater devotee than me? Is it Narada, will you do me a small service? Anything, my Lord. Here is a lamp, and it is filled to the brim with oil. Now I want you to traverse the whole length and breadth of the entire universe, circle it, and come back to me. Only one condition, don't spill a drop of oil. And so it didn't take him that long, because in celestial time is different from ours. And at some point he comes back and delivers the lamp with oil, the vessel, not one drop of oil spilt. And he was very, very pleased with himself. I've carried out my Lord's instructions. Then Vishnu asks him, how many times during this exercise, and congratulations, by the way, you always give praise first, but how many times during this journey of yours did you think of me? Oh, I couldn't do that. Why not? If I had done that, I would have spilt a drop of oil. All my concentration was there in this lamp. And then he said, you see this man busy day and night with so many activities, so many things to do, so many things to plan, such physical work, and working day and night. And he was able to think of me twice in the midst of all of this. So we cannot think that our so-called round of daily activities and our domestic concerns, and don't forget, our domestic concerns are extensions of our egoistic concerns, our attachment to this, what we like to call the molecular self. Molecular self is the human body. Attached to this body, we are concerned with bodily things. And this kind of egoism is the biggest obstacle that we have. Now, we can't attack this. That's not a good technique. What is a good technique is to see if we can steer the attention in a different direction, in a different way, and thereby carry out what varying saints and sages have called, and the Lord himself has called, fixing your mind, fixing your attention on me. And what St. Paul says, pray without ceasing, never stop. There's a great series of books, The Pilgrim's Way, and this is all to do with this passage. A pilgrim hears this, pray without ceasing, and wonders, in the midst of all my activities, how is it possible? And then the answer comes eventually by meditating on this and by repeating a certain phrase, a mantra, if you will, that is sacred to the Greek Orthodox Church. Sharada Devi, who we really regard as Divine Mother, she says, true it is that there is no hard and fast rule about the time of japa, yet morning and evening are the favorable periods. Whatever the time be, you must do japa every day. It's not good to forego it any day. And then one should practice japa and meditation at regular times, giving up idleness. While living at Dakshinazwa, she said, I used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and practice japa and meditation. One day I felt a little indisposed and left the bed rather late. The next day, I woke up still late through laziness. Gradually, I found that I didn't feel inclined to get up early at all. And then I said to myself, at least I have fallen a victim. At last I have fallen, a victim to idleness. Thereupon I began to force myself to get up early, and gradually I got back my former habit. In such matters, one should keep up the practice with unyielding resolution. What a beautiful human story about the practice of japa and meditation, and how we may well be inclined to lapse. But are there other sacred times of the day? I mentioned 7 is the monastic habit, when the monks do perform the liturgy, and the recommendation for householders is at least twice. That is why the story mentions twice daily, morning and evening, at least that much. But you see, one is dependent on the other. That is your normal waking life, what you do, how you think, how you behave. That has its effect on the meditation, as we have seen, and vice versa too. When the meditation is not done properly, then it acts as a kind of battery which is drained throughout the day. A good start to the day and a good start to your devotions gives you an impetus for the whole of the day. And so you can't really have one without the other. But is it possible to pause during the day? Here in Ireland, that's what is done. At 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the evening, and 12 noon, a pause is done. What is called the Angelus is repeated. And then look at the Muslims. 5 times a day they manage it. See the wonderful discipline that they have. And it's all according to set times, all according to sunrise, sunset, and specific hours of the day. So we have to be watchful, not only for our own mindfulness as to whether it is in a spiritual condition at any moment in time, and we also have to do this without expectation. And we have to do it with considerable faith. And how we keep that faith going? We can repeat this mantra all the time of the day, if you have one. So let us talk a little bit about what constitutes japa and this mantra. Of course, repetition of this mantra is called japa. But why is it significant? It's not just a bunch of sounds and words held together. It has a potency. The potency is delivered as if a divine reservoir was delivering it through a pipeline and through a faucet, that faucet being the Guru. And then that becomes the sound embodiment of your chosen ideal. And most people will have to have one. Very few will find it easy to think of the divine and think of the pure highest principle in an impersonal way. So let us take anyway the capacity that we have, natural capacity we have for imagination, and use it. Make sure that we have a finely tuned imagination that evokes the emotional feelings that goes with any such imagination. Of course, we do it anyway, but we do it in a negative way. We have fears that surface. We have doubts that surface. You take it to an extreme, somebody who fears a lot, we may be sitting here in a hall, and that person will wonder, it suddenly struck him. What happens if an airplane comes and dives through the roof? Well, what's the likelihood of it? What's the probability? Why did you ever think of such a thing? Well, many doubts and fears and temptations will arise in the mind, because we are essentially looking for a sense of security. And faith is the answer. Faith means that we are absolutely confident that all our resources are supplied internally and externally, what we call nature. That we don't lack anything, we don't want for anything. All our needs are met. Just to illustrate this, during the guided meditation, I was reading actually from the book, The Art of Meditation by Joel Goldsmith. There he gives, in the section on the practice, a beautiful understanding, and I will modify some of the words here. He's writing in the Christian medium, but we can substitute the word Christ for divine to make it more universal. He says, in meditation, the meaning of grace may be revealed to one of us to one of us in one way and to another in an entirely different way, but to both it may come with such force as to open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And my comment on that would be that persist in meditation. Don't expect a result, any expectation, any future orientation, any first person singular introduced in meditation is no longer meditation. But you'll find at some moment, some breakthrough will happen because the grace is flowing in a timely way. And so, such force as to open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing that there shall not be room enough to receive it. To each one, something different will unfold from that, which is given to anyone else. If we are in earnest, we should take the statement, and it's a biblical statement, "My grace is sufficient unto thee," into consciousness many times during the day. Many times during the day. If we abide in that statement of truth, we shall be meditating and thus fulfilling one of the most important teachings that has ever been given to the human race. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, you shall ask what you will, and it shall be done unto you. If we keep the word, and the word in the capital letter W, word, that is the cosmic mind, the Lord of the universe in its personal form, as God's mind. And if we keep that alive in our consciousness by dwelling on it 4, 5, 8, 10, 12 times a day, I mentioned 7, 12 times a day, and also when we awaken in the middle of the night, we shall find that we are meditating. We are letting the word of truth abide in us, and that divine becomes the activity of our consciousness. So what is this beloved God? What is this most personal entity that we have the privilege to encounter one-on-one, personally, directly? If you put it like that, nobody will dream of not meditating. Don't you want a personal, direct encounter? Don't you want an intimate association? Don't you want to be in desperation, panting with desperation, that experience of being loved and loving in return? And if you don't have that feeling, then you should really try to deepen this relationship. How do we do it? See, it's a circular argument. By thinking of it day and night, repeating this mantra that you have, or along with other positive phrases and words. And when the mind is idle, that is when you put it in. Don't wait for a problem to assail you. Shore up your defenses ahead of time, because your enemy is lurking and will attack you all of a sudden. What is your enemy? Anger, greed, lust, doubt, fear, all of these things. A feeling that you should reciprocate somebody's anger, that maybe relatives have not been kind or good to you, and that beleaguers your mind day and night, day and night, day and night, thinking that you're going to live forever with this problem, but there are no permanent habitats, and this will be fleeting. So the emotions have a powerful influence on us. To rally the emotions of love around to that divine entity makes the huge difference. And so what is this entity? If you really desire to know what that inner entity is, that inner Ishtadevata, that personal ideal, which is personal to you and supplies you with an ideal of absolute perfection and life and light and love, begin with this very humble acknowledgement. Lord, Father, Mother, friend, I know so little about you. Help me to understand you. Then close your eyes and keep your attention on the idea of this Ishtadevata. And every time the mind tries to wander, gently bring it back. There are two ways to control a horse. You can whip it or you can persuade it. You can be kind to it. You can encourage it. You can make friends with it. And the latter is the better thing. Keep your attention centered on that. Ultimately, you will catch the vision of the real meaning of this chosen ideal, a meaning that you will never quite be able to explain to anyone else, but you yourself will know it. And for Christians, the Christ will be an actual presence in your consciousness. It will be a power, an influence, a being. Yet it will be something that you cannot define. No matter what you might say about this divine entity, it would not be that. It will be much more. No matter what you say, no matter how much you describe it, it's endlessly much, much more. And that being is alive in your heart right now. And I'm going to pause there so you can close your eyes a little bit and feel that. Because right now, that is it, right now. It is not to come. It is here right now. There's a great story from the great author Tolstoy. And he tells a story of a simple shoemaker called Martin Avdij. I don't think it makes too much difference what his name is. Anyway, the story goes he was a fine cobbler. He did his work well. He never promised to do anything that he couldn't do. And he stayed busy with his work, and he lived in a basement, and he only had one window. From that window, he could see all the shoes going past. And because the place was very small, he was able to identify by the feet going past who was who. And so he could recognize all these people by their shoes. Now he had a wife, but she died. And all their children also died. And in their infancy, there was only one son left, and that was a 3-year-old son. And he had the opportunity to have that son brought up by an aunt, but he decided, no, let him be with me. So he decided to care for the child himself. But he wasn't destined to have that child very long either, and the son died just a few years later from fever. And when these things happen in our life, big or small, we're all in a state of bereavement, in a state of grief. The great student of bereavement and the great doctor of bereavement, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, has identified all stages of grief. But it means not necessarily death, because all our grief is the same pattern. We start off, you can't believe it. I can't believe it happened to me. Then the next thing, of course, will be a certain anger, and then a blaming, and then a guilt, and all these things go in sequence. And it's not that they're linear. They come and they go until finally acceptance settles in. So it's quite natural when a tragedy occurs, particularly death, or even an en masse death. Let us say it's a global tragedy, and we shake our fist and we say, why did God do this? Well, I'm not sure if God knows anything about that, but anyway, we blame him anyway. And so that was his case. His faith was shaken. And so he denied God, wondering how he could allow such a thing to happen to him if he was such a kind God. But one day, a missionary visited him and told him of his he told the missionary of his hardships and his lack of faith. And the missionary told Martin that he should live his life for God, because any other thing would be selfish, and not deny him, because God's will is the ultimate deciding factor. And as humans, we can't question that. Whatever we think, however we try to prevent things, God's will still prevail. And so with these words, they left a deep impression of Martin that stimulated him to try and regain his faith a little bit. And so he got hold of scriptural text and started reading them, large printed text he got hold of. In the beginning, he just read a little bit on holidays and weekends. But then he began to read more and more. It became a daily habit. And he found that his life became filled with joy and peace. And after his day of work, he would sit down with a lamp and he would read. Now, one night, he read a particular passage about a Pharisee who had invited Jesus into his house. And in the house, a woman anointed and washed Jesus' feet with her very tears. And when we pray and when we meditate, do tears flow? Now, Martin thought of himself as the Pharisee in the story, as he was only living for himself. And then that night he had a dream. As he dreamt and as he slept, he thought he heard a voice of God telling him that he would visit him the next day. And Martin woke up and was very skeptical, and yet had a certain anticipation. And so, naturally, with one window in his basement, he would be looking out. Is God come? Has God come? What about now? This kind of expectation that we have, impatience that we have, does not serve us very well. And yet, by the same token, whatever energy we put in, that result will come out. Success is speedy for the highly energetic, says Patanjali in his Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So he watched. He was very skeptical, and he watched out his window for God. Are you coming? Are you coming? But while he was searching and looking out, trying to expect God, I'm not sure what he thought he looked like, he saw a friend of his, Stepanich, shoveling away snow, says Tolstoy. And Martin invited in him for a warm drink. And they talked for a while. And Martin told Stepanovich about Jesus and the Pharisees. And Stepanich was moved to tears. And Stepanich later left and thanked Martin for the food, for the drink, for the soul and the body. And Martin later saw a young woman outside with a baby, not properly dressed for the cold. And he invited her in for some food and gave her warmer clothes and money. And Martin also told her about Jesus, and she thanked him and left. Then, says Tolstoy, he saw a young boy stealing from an older lady. He saw it from his window. And he went outside and settled their argument. And as he did so, he extended love and compassion towards the boy and the woman, arguing for the boy's poverty and arguing that for the woman's forgiveness. That night, before he retired to bed, Martin wondered why God hasn't visited me. But then it occurred to him, and as he slept, a voice that he attributes to God says, you see the three figures that appeared in your home? You showered hospitality today. They said that when he helped them, he was helping God, said the voices. And Martin then realized that God had indeed visited him in the form of his friend, in the form of the woman who required warmth, and the boy and the widow. And so when we look out then and see these daily things, not even expecting to see God, with a heart of compassion and generosity of spirit, the secret is that behind all of that is this most beloved, and we never noticed it in all the daily events. Whenever we encountered a person, whenever we encountered a scene, whenever we encountered an event, even when we encountered the cars and the traffic, and even when we encountered situations, awkward situations, so-called, recognizing not only the immanent presence there, but also how that works through everybody and appears as everybody. In other words, as everybody, as they say, as. Should we then ask for a relief from all our troubles? Well, let us try and see if there's a very high example. I was reading recently the life of St. John of the Cross. And he had a vision, he had many visions, but one vision he had. And the vision, the Lord said to him, look, you've done so much good and so much service to me. What will I do for you in a special way? I can grant you anything. And John gives a true monastic answer. I'm not saying everybody should be monastics, but there's an ideal. And John says, yes, if only I had physical suffering. If only my physical suffering would increase so that I may understand what it feels like, what compassion feels like, what people's suffering feels like, so that I may really understand how you yourself may have suffered as an incarnation. All incarnations have suffered because they have taken others' sufferings on themselves. And gurus and teachers, they vow to do the same thing. And the second thing he asked for, may I be despised. Most people don't want that. I hope somebody thinks well of me. When somebody scandalizes me or scandalizes against me or says something and it spreads a rumor and I feel people don't like me either in my family or friends, I don't like it. But the reason why I don't like it is, I'm afraid to say, egoism. A guru, a competent teacher's job is to smash somebody's ego as much as possible by any words or what have you. And that person may not be, may say, let me change my guru or something like that. So he will ask, may I be despised? May people talk all kinds of things against me because I want to, once and for all, do away with this ego. The one big obstacle in my way. Let me learn that humility that will dispense with that completely. Now, most people, when they pray for the opposite. Given the opportunity to get any kind of boon they wish, they might ask for all kinds of things. Give me happiness, give me long life, give me health, etc. Maybe solve the COVID crisis in an instant. All kinds of things they may ask for. But here's an entity who says quite the opposite. And he says, give me more suffering. Let me suffer for others. Let me take their sufferings. Let me understand how it was that you suffered. And let me be completely despised. Both wishes came true, by the way. So, in the Bhagavad Gita, we are told in the 6th chapter about the difficulty of controlling the mind. But the question is not to do with a moment of meditation. The question is to do with the mind in general. He says, Arjuna asked this question, see, Yoyam yugas toya prukta samyena Madhusudana. This yoga of equanimity taught by you, itasyaham na pashyami kanchalatat stitam stiram. I don't see how it can be kept up. Why? Because of the unsteadiness, the restlessness of the mind. It seems an impossibility. For the mind is restless, is turbulent, it's strong, it's obstinate. It seems to me as hard to control as the wind. Now, like a good teacher, Krishna agrees. He says, yes, doubtless, the mind is restless, it's hard to control, but it's not impossible. We can all do it. Two things are necessary: practice and non-attachment. What does practice mean? constantly bringing the mind back, bringing the mind back. And that is what we do when we repeat, lovingly repeat, God's name throughout our secular day. It doesn't require any energy to do it. It's simple. There are no side effects. It's a wonderful thing. And it just requires mental repetition, that's all. Some people, when they hear a piece of music, they can't get it out of their heads, and they wish some demon would enter in them and throw the music out. Can't get rid of it. You hear a catchy song, and then it's played. They liked it in the beginning, but when you play it 1,040 times, it's no longer a pleasure. But you see, when you repeat lovingly God's name, because that has the audial representation, the audial body of that. And so I think I have told people many times before, but there was a devotee who went on a pilgrimage and asked, so what spiritual practice should I do? I said, make friends with your mantra. As you're doing your yatra, as you're doing your pilgrimage, constantly, lovingly repeat God's name, even if you don't attach anything to it, do it. And then after a while, he realized, and there's a precedent for this. And that is in this way of the pilgrim, this Russian pilgrim who goes, trying to understand this phrase, pray without ceasing. How can you do so? And he recites this Jesus prayer constantly over and over again. And in the beginning, finds it very dry, finds no real meaning in it. Then all of a sudden, the meaning starts being revealed more and more and more and more until he finds it's like breath. He cannot do without it. So we all have the opportunity for this practice. So it's hard to attain this unity, this control of the mind, this concentration, this yoga by somebody who can't control himself. But it can be attained by him who has controlled himself and who strives by the right means. And then what should we do? So the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita gives us a number of options because it begins with this formula of what we should do. Mayeva mana adatstva mayi buddhim niveshaya. Fix your mind on me alone, nothing else. Let your thoughts dwell on me. You can't get a clearer message. And hereafter you will live in me alone. Of this, there's no doubt. By adding that, he makes it clear. Now, samshayaha, there is no doubt. So, if you're not able to fix your mind on me, then what? Because many people said, that's not easy. Ramakrishna gives this example, Swami Purnananda too. It's like children holding onto a pole and swinging around it, but never letting go. They let go, the centrifugal force will take them away, and they'll hurt themselves. So do that. Many times in different ways is told. Understand what is your divine goal and purpose in life. Tie a knot in your handkerchief, put it in your pocket, and do your work. And like the tortoise swimming, always cognizant and remembering that the eggs are left on the bank. Like the maidservant that works and looks after other people's children, but the mind is on her own children in the village. So samples and stories like this are told frequently. So fixing your mind on God and nothing else. It is told in many religions in different ways. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. Every fiber of your being, every hand movement, every leg movement, every breath. But is it easy? No. So if you can't do that, is there another alternative? So yes, atachitam samadhattam na shaknosi mayi stiram. If you're not able to fix your mind steadily on me, then seek to reach me by the yoga of constant practice. What is called abhyasa yoga. raising up counter thoughts at every opportunity. Bring the mind back. And then if you can't even do that, then surely you can offer actions for the Lord's sake. And if you can't do that, then at least the fruits of the actions can be offered up. But does it help if there are sacred times in the day? So let us see what we mean by sacred times in the day. This is just reflect as a suggestion. Let's take our first opportunity and we'll use the liturgical hours as a kind of guide. Now, of course, there is something called Brahma Muhurta, that is specifically 1 hour and 36 minutes before the sun rises. Now today, in Ireland anyway, the sun rises around about 4:30 at very, very least. So that means getting up much earlier than that. Now I'm telling you about an ideal and saying if you catch hold of what you can and use it, so be it. And there is a great advantage in a regular practice, same time every day. But you can see the early morning before the sun rises has a certain feeling to it. And this, of course, in the Western monastic tradition or liturgical tradition is called matins, morning. Morning is the early morning before sunrise. What are the characteristics of such a thing? If we go back and talk about John of the Cross, he writes a book, The Dark Night of the Soul. And he refers to the whole spiritual journey as a night and the ultimate illumination and realization as day. But you never quite get close to the day until night is fully lifted. And when we have the dawn is just there announcing something. When we become near that entity that we call God, our full spiritual realization of our own internal divine self, there's somehow some kind of gap in it. It's like looking at a lamp and you can see the inner light or the inner bulb, but there's still one small layer still left until that's finally gone, finally removed. Now, the dark night of the soul says there are two nights, the two aspects to this. One is the dark night referring to the cultural efforts you'll have to make, the discipline efforts you'll have to make. Because what we consider daylight depends on all the sense organs. And if the sense organs are driven toward their objects, and bear in mind the practical difficulty about that is that all our difficulty comes from the sense organs and their objects. The flow of consciousness going out through the sense organs, arriving at the objects, and our reaction to them is the source of all our difficulties. Can we learn to do away with all of these desires and take our attention inward? And do that by increasing our love of God, fixing our mind in this way. So this is what is understood, constant practice. Bringing the mind back and taking advantage of the night watch before the sun comes, feeling the stillness in it, feeling the quietness in it, having the divine expectation in it. Having, of course, previously gone through the discipline of will, of denying the mouth, denying the sounds, denying, controlling the inputs of food, controlling the inputs of reactions or reactions to thought, to other people's behavior, or our own thoughts, or our own temptations, or doubts, or fears, or events and stories of the past that we ruminate on endlessly and give us cause for sadness, or the agitation of an expectation in the future. All of these things we have to control, so that every spiritual effort in every spiritual tradition will say, that the self-discipline has to be acquired. We have to learn to control the will. But on the other side, we have to take all that externally moving energy and redirect it inward. And then there comes the time when the sun comes up. A wonderful opportunity to praise the sun, because the sun has, since time immemorial, been the symbol of the divine. Every quality we give God, we give to the sun. It is radiant, it is beautiful, it knows every corner, it is a life giver. And so quite naturally, we can often think of God, if you don't have a particular form, to think of that as the sun. And then it gives us the clue. What we are worshipping actually is that which lights the sun from within. And so the second is lauds, it is praise. The second then comes, and as the sun rises, we have an internal feeling of joy, awakening, and we also celebrate this awakening with praise. And then what about if we pause mid-morning, just for a few moments in our work? In work, sometimes around about 10 o'clock maybe, people take a tea break. All right? We can be consciously use that and say, let me now think and make that a blessing hour. May that be an hour where, or that may be that a time when we think, let us bless all colleagues, let us bless all people drinking coffee, let us bless the entire spectra of all the species in the world, the human species, the animal species, the plant species, everything. In all of these, we can repeat our mantra with a different flavor. And then at 12 midday, in tropical countries, certainly, the sun is at its zenith, and it can represent for us illumination. The fact that that entity is not only love, but also light, the light of our consciousness. In Zimbabwe, whenever there was an important decision to make or an important letter to send, I used to write it and exactly post it at midday, 12 o'clock. I'd even wait, 12 o'clock post. And then, of course, in the evening, we have a chance. We have a chance for our Vespers, Arti, when the sun is going down now. And we then replicate that. This is a chance, according to Shitara Devi, this is a chance to review all the things that went on the day. It has a different flavor to other forms of meditation and worship. Because what is in our minds anyway but the events of the day? Instead of shutting them out and saying, thank goodness, and collapsing in front of some entertainment or something, review the events as offerings to the divine. Because we are not using our energy. It is all the divine's energy. There's no energy we have of our own. We may as well give it back to its source and to its owner. And what about just before we sleep? Some people suffer from insomnia because their mind is so crowded with all the events and worries and difficulties and what will I do tomorrow and this and that and the other. Well, a wonderful way to put insomnia to bed, so to speak, is once more to tune the mind in at that point, just before going to bed. And as you fall asleep, you can imagine that your head is on, instead of a pillow, is on the divine source's lap. The father, the mother, the friend, on their lap, and off you drift, repeating your mantra. There was somebody who had an operation, 4-hour operation, a devotee, and they said to me, they asked me, what should I do? I said, before you go in under the anesthetic, repeat your mantra, do your japa. And they said, what a wonderful experience they had. Absolutely, of course, the anesthetic will also give you a wonderful experience, but what a wonderful experience, drifting off into that. And remarkably, of course, as they awoke, still repeating somehow their mantra. And in each one, there's a great silence. There's no sacredness or sanctity without silence. And so before we sit, we try to embrace the silence, try to feel the mood of that particular sacred period of the day. And as we feel that mood and tune into it, then we will see and hear and feel the divine hand within us all the time. And so these are some things to do with sacred times of the day, some practical things, so that there is no need, we should have no difficulty in making interjections, divine interjections throughout the day, and helping us not to separate all these secular activities and concerns and anxieties from an intensive spiritual life. Intensive spiritual life is a progressive thing. It is not a sudden thing, because if you do something like that suddenly, it'll suddenly finish also. How many times we start a thing with great intention and great enthusiasm, and then after a while it goes away. When we do all the workshops, unfortunately, I know that after the workshop, people will be enthusiastic for about 2 weeks. And then that enthusiasm will go away. That practice will go away. And instead of implementing it, there's great evidence that they did it, they locked away their notes somewhere, never looked at them again, and never used the principles. It is said that in coaching and training, that before a person really absorbs the principle, it should be repeated a minimum of 6 times. And so we have to continuously repeat the principles of spirituality, because that is what gives us a foundation for mobilizing us, moving us, until we become practiced in it. And our first habit becomes our second habit. It becomes entrenched in the habit level. And our minds become purified and illumined with divine grace. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.